The Soviet soldiers weren't prepared for what they'd find buried beneath the snow. When they broke down the steel doors in January 1945, the smell hit them first. Chemicals mixed with something else, something human. Inside, the walls were lined with jars, hundreds of them, each one containing specimens that made even battle-hardened men turn away. The 322nd Rifle Division had been pushing through Poland for weeks, liberating concentration camps as the Nazi regime crumbled. They'd seen horrors, mass graves, gas chambers, skeletal prisoners barely alive. But Facility 19 was different. The complex sat 15 miles outside Poznan, hidden in dense forest. No guards, no soldiers, no prisoners, just silence, and bare bulbs flickering overhead, casting shadows that made empty corridors feel alive. Captain Alexei Volkov led the advance team to the second floor. The laboratory was pristine, too pristine. Microscopes on metal tables, notebooks filled with neat German handwriting, glass beakers containing liquids from clear to dark crimson. Then he saw the tanks. 7 cylindrical chambers lined the far wall, each filled with murky preservation fluid. His flashlight caught something floating in the nearest one, a human body, eyes still open, face pressed against the glass. Dissected, organs visible, tubes running to machines that still hummed with power. The temperature gauge showed the system had been active for less than 12 hours. Someone had been here, recently. They found thousands of pages in the office, 3 years of meticulous records. Lieutenant Kozlov translated, his hands shaking. Research Station 19th. Operational since 1942. Official purpose: advancing German medical science through experimental procedures. The reality was human experimentation, extreme environmental tolerance testing. The Nazis wanted to know how much the human body could endure. Temperature experiments. How long could someone survive in freezing water? The files contained detailed logs. Subject 247, male, age 32, placed in ice water, heart stopped after 70 minutes. No successful revival. Page after page, hundreds of subjects, thousands of data points, all prisoners, political dissidents, Jews, Soviet prisoners of war, people reduced to numbers in a ledger. The basement revealed the full scope. One chamber simulated high altitude, a vacuum chamber where prisoners were exposed to pressure equivalent to 40,000 feet. Lungs collapsed, eyes hemorrhaged. They clawed at sealed doors until they lost consciousness. Another room, chemical exposure, mustard gas, phosgene, experimental nerve agents. The walls still reeked. Black stains marked where bodies had been dragged away. The surgery wing was worse. Grafting experiments. Limbs removed from healthy prisoners and attached to wounded ones. Organs swapped between subjects. In one case, researchers attempted to transplant an entire face. None survived. But the experiments continued. The surgical logs showed no acknowledgement that these were human beings. No recognition of the screaming, the agony. Just data, just science, just monsters pretending they were advancing knowledge. On the third day, Sergeant Petrov found the children's ward, 12 small beds, each with restraints. Someone had painted cartoon animals on the walls, bears and rabbits with exaggerated smiles, toys in a wooden box. But the medical equipment told the real story. IV stands, syringes sized for small arms, charts tracking growth rates. They'd experimented on children. Petrov stood there for 20 minutes, not moving. When he emerged, something inside him had broken. He never spoke about the photographs he'd found, the detailed notes about which children were responsive to stimuli. Some horrors don't need to be shared. The facility had employed at least 40 researchers: Dr. Heinrich Vogel, the director, Dr. Ernst Keller, chief of experimental surgery. But when the Soviets arrived, everyone was gone. The evacuation had been orderly. Most equipment left behind, but personal effects removed. Tire tracks in the snow led north toward German territory. The Nazi researchers had escaped with their most valuable data. Film reels were the worst part. Soviet command ordered them reviewed. Kozlov watched 3 before he had to stop. Black and white footage, prisoners strapped to tables, researchers in white coats moving with calm efficiency. Then the experiments began. He sat in the dark for an hour afterward. When he emerged, he filed his report. He didn't mention the sounds, the begging in languages the German researchers pretended not to understand, the casual conversations doctors had over operating tables while subjects screamed. Word spread quickly. NKVD officers arrived, military intelligence, Soviet Academy of Sciences representatives. Within 2 weeks, the facility was stripped to bare walls. But the official reports being filed didn't match what the soldiers had seen. Details were changed, the scope minimized. The children's ward disappeared from the record entirely. The soldiers who witnessed the truth were quietly reassigned, given orders not to discuss it. The official story became simple. Facility 19 was a Nazi research installation where war crimes occurred. Details classified. End of discussion. But across Europe, Americans and British were making similar discoveries, and they were finding something else. Many researchers had vanished. Some fled to South America. Others melted into civilian populations, and some were recruited. Operation Paperclip. The Soviets had their own version. Both sides wanted Nazi scientific knowledge. Even doctors whose experiments violated every medical principle, because the research, however evil, still had value. Data on extreme conditions, chemical weapons effects, knowledge that would take years to replicate ethically. So they made deals with devils. Dr. Heinrich Vogel was never found. His name appeared on wanted lists, but no arrest was made. There were rumors: Argentina in 1948, Soviet facility in Siberia, American intelligence with a new identity. None verified. But decades later, medical advances appeared that raised questions. Hypothermia treatment techniques, high-altitude physiology understanding, how much came from ethical research, how much from places like Facility 19. No one wanted to ask, because the answer might require admitting we'd built modern medicine on atrocities. The survivors faced their own nightmare, too damaged to recover. When they tried to testify, they faced skepticism. The experiments seemed too cruel, too calculated. Without complete documentation, the Soviets had classified it, survivors' testimony seemed fantastical. So they learned to stay silent. In 1961, Jakob Klein came forward. He'd been 17 at Facility 19 in 1943. He had proof: tattoos, medical records, burn scars from chemical exposure. A journalist published his story. Brief scandal, calls for investigation. Then the story disappeared. Klein died in 1967, largely forgotten. The physical site decayed, repurposed as military installation, then warehouse, then abandoned. By the 1970s, a ruin. But people felt something there. Oppressive atmosphere, dread. Some heard voices, screaming with no source. In 2003, the Polish government bulldozed what remained. Now there's a small memorial, a stone marker acknowledging that a Nazi facility operated here, that victims died. Most people who pass don't stop. The forest has reclaimed the land. If you didn't know, you'd never guess what happened, which is exactly what those Soviet soldiers feared, that the horror would be forgotten, that victims would become statistics, that perpetrators would escape justice. And they were largely right. In 2018, A documentary team found Dr. Emil Fischer, a junior assistant from the facility, 93 years old, living in Bavaria, never prosecuted, never questioned. When asked about Facility 19, he claimed not to remember much, but they had his signature on experiment logs. His response: "We were following orders. The subjects were going to die anyway. At least this way, their deaths had meaning." That phrase crystallizes how these crimes happened. Intelligent people convincing themselves that atrocity was science, that torture was research. Fisher died 6 months later, never admitted wrongdoing, never apologized. No marker on his grave mentions Facility 19. The Soviet soldiers who first entered are gone. Volkov died in 1987, Kozlov in 1991. Petrov, who found the children's ward, took his own life in 1953. The survivors have mostly passed. The victims left nothing except numbers in ledgers. What remains is the record. Documentation of what humans can do when we abandon morality, when we reduce people to objects, when we convince ourselves the ends justify any means. Facility 19 wasn't an anomaly. It was part of a system, one of dozens of similar sites, and the truly haunting part? It could happen again. The capacity for this evil doesn't disappear. It just waits. The ruins are gone. Documents scattered across archives, victims dead, perpetrators escaped. But the lesson remains. Human cruelty has no limit. Neither should our determination to prevent it. The Soviets found horror inside Facility 19. They documented it, classified it, tried to move on. We can't. We know the truth, and knowing means bearing witness. Their suffering was real, and we cannot look away, even 75 years later, even when it's easier to forget. We owe them that much.